it deals very directly with what we do, I think, and Michael's saying, you know, describing something which is very true to our process that is not necessarily known. There's a kind of perception that films start with scripts as a basic way of working. I think, you know, we work in the movies, not in the righties, as Zack Snyder has said, and we are increasingly, I think, given the opportunity now to work in a development process. I'm working on an animated film right now where there is a tradition of developing the visuals and the story side by side, and it's actually more healthy than the idea of a writer who perhaps works in a room, you know, in isolation, and there are like large gaps in visual logic that come from that, and we do spend a great deal of our early prep in research and in concept development. So there's a way of making films that I think is actually getting stronger in a way and getting back to a kind of more core idea of what filmmaking really is, which is you know, essentially a collaborative process where there's an equal balance between story that is supported by environment and by the visual frame, which is essentially our responsibility.
I was just going to mention that Michael got a really nice compliment. I was on the phone with a mutual friend who was the visual effects supervisor on Iron Man. And usually when they screw around with a picture, it usually just gets worse and worse and worse. There's a million stories about that. But our friend John Nelson, Oscar winner for Gladiator, serious guy, he said he felt the reason why that picture was as good as it was that nobody ever gave in. Nobody ever stopped trying to make it better. Nobody flaked out. Because a lot of things that happen on movies are so tiring that people fold up. And then you're dead. But he said that Michael was certainly a big part of that process of making that movie. And the movie's wonderful, you know, I think. We got a bunch of questions. This guy, light blue.
This was kind of a two-pronged question given the breadth of all of the projects you guys have worked on. In the case of where you took a piece and actually had to reimagine it because it had been done before, in Battlestar Galactica and probably in the Chocolate Factory. And then the other projects where you had iconic figures like Spider-Man and that kind of thing. Where does your inspiration source come? Do you take like things that have been that you're redoing and repackaging, and you just chuck everything you've ever seen and try and ignore it? Or do you use that as a basis to say, what spin can I put on this and where can I go with it? And in the case of like iconic like Spider-Man or something along those things, how do you take a 2D medium and really get breadth of color and depth? Where do those inspirational sources come from?
I think you guys really, this is your, both of you, and you both do this all the time.
When I got called on Battlestar, I met with the executive producer. In television, you work more with the producer, but in this case, I got to work with the director as well, who I had worked with on a previous pilot. I got called down, we talked, and decided that the only thing we were going to keep from the original series, which we thought was pretty good for the time, was the Mark II. We took the Egyptian icons off of the Mark II and kind of elongated it and made it more ours. Everything else past that point was our design, our thinking, David Icke's input, Ron Moore's input, and we just started with, we don't want any conventional space show. We don't, some of these guys, Ron Moore came off of Star Trek, so he had that he didn't want to go back to, which was kind of nice because then we could say, oh, we'll make the control room like an operating room. We'll go that way. There will be no windows. It'll be heavy. It'll be like an aircraft carrier. It'll be wherever we want it to go. So it was a great free approach that some might think it's constricting, but in our case, it was liberating to go that way.
And for, I think for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I mean, Tim Burton was pretty clear that he did not want to, he didn't like the original movie and he didn't want anything to do with it and pretty much banned anybody from seeing it. There was a moment when he revealed himself by singing songs from the first movie into the microphone on the set, and
Oompa.
Oompa Loompa, gave himself away. But no, I think we felt that, and I think, you know, why copy a film that's been done before? What I was interested in was to see what Tim would do with that material, and obviously, and someone like Tim Burton makes any material he works with into his own. So it was far more a matter of finding a balance between what his personal obsessions were and the Roald Dahl original story, which we definitely went back to, and is a much closer fit to Tim Burton's vision than the original, I think. As far as the translation of something like a comic book, and then I'll pass this along, but for Watchmen, it was a very fundamental issue when we started working with Zach, that to copy or try and emulate the kind of tone and, say, two-dimensionality of the comic book would be completely inappropriate for Watchmen. Watchmen at the time was, in its own way, creating a new kind of realism for graphic novels. And so our task, I think, was to try and translate the intent of the graphic novel into the kind of political satire, the context politically of a real world that you understand. I mean, the whole point about Watchmen is that the characters are comic book heroes living and failing in a real world. But then you also have a certain need to balance that with the fact these guys are wearing costumes and they are not going to be found walking down the street in the real world. So we did that with a great degree of color control, where we really pushed the colors and took the color palette from Dave Gibbons' sort of original impetus, and then put that on top of a sort of Taxi Driver New York of 1980s. And so that was our way of trying to mix the demands of stylization with the demands of kind of socio-political reality.
Let me just say something about has anybody seen the original Dick Tracy that was with Warren Beatty? Now, if you look at that movie, to approach a film and design it that way today, I don't know if it would work. It's an interesting idea. In those days, it was a great idea. Let's take the comic and let's translate it exactly like this and see if we can get red here and blue over here and yellow jackets and all that stuff. And Dick Silbert, one of the great designers who's no longer with us, did that. And I think it was one of the first comic book movies, actually, I think. I might be wrong about that, but certainly one of the big ones. But to do that nowadays, like Alex says, I don't think you can do that. Like Watchmen, I remember reading those in Joel's office, Joel Silver's office, 20 years ago, I think. And they had it's been a long time, and then they wouldn't translate naturally. So you do have to find a vernacular that's updated, that's changed. Iron Man, for instance, is rather boring when you look at the old comics. The new stuff by Adi Granoff is very interesting. Does anybody know Adi Granoff at all? Yeah. Okay, a few of you.
What?
He's an incredible artist. But he does the new one, the modern one. And but his stuff is great and updated in that same way that Alex is talking about. Anyway, we should watch this.
We'll take a look at this. I have to say, I think part of the reason you can get away with it now is there's so many iterations of comic books. There's only one Dick Tracy. There's never been another Dick Tracy.
That's true.
There's so many Iron Mans. There's
no,
so
but I mean,
many
it's very.
X-Men.
It's a time thing. It really, they just don't stand up. And I remember the opening of Watchmen. I don't know if you still do the opening. I'd love to know if you do.
You got it?
The opening was that face, and then the camera. I remember pulls up, way up. Way up. Does it still do that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's so great. That's the best. That's the best.